You think this is a joke?
Solve this and I'll marry you. The sentence sliced through the air like a blade, sharp, arrogant, and absolutely serious. Lance Whitmore didn't flinch when he said it. He didn't laugh and didn't smirk for the cameras. He meant it. Or, at least, he meant to humiliate her. That night on the 68th floor of the Monarch, New York's most exclusive high-rise restaurant, the room was thick with silk ties, Rolexes, and billion-dollar egos. It was a private cocktail summit of the tech elite, and no one there expected the night's most viral moment to come from the woman pouring their water. She wore red, a crisp serving dress that hugged her frame with dignity, a white apron tied neatly at the waist, and a gold name tag on her chest that read Amira. She was young, 26 maybe, with skin the shade of dark honey and a smile bright enough to outshine the skyline outside those glass walls. But nobody cared. To them, she was just another waitress, just another background black woman they wouldn't remember by morning. Until she heard him. Solve this and I'll marry you. The math problem was scribbled on the back of a cocktail napkin, a twisted piece of logic that one of Lance's AI engineers had called unsolvable in real time just an hour earlier. But he wasn't really challenging her intellect. He was mocking her existence. The room laughed, soft at first, then louder. A ripple of privileged amusement from Ivy League mouths who saw her as entertainment, not equal. A few whispered about her confidence. Others raised their brows like, who does she think she is? Amira Hayes didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She took the napkin, held it for a beat, and studied it. 10 seconds. 30. 60. Then her pen moved. Smooth, deliberate strokes. Her lips pressed together in focus. The laughter died in real time. One by one, heads turned. Wine glasses froze mid-air. Conversations dropped off into stunned silence. When she handed the napkin back to Lance, there was no drama, no monologue, just 3 quiet words. Check your math. And just like that, everything changed. If you're watching this, welcome to Hidden Worth, where we bring you true, powerful, emotional black stories that shatter stereotypes and shake the system. If you believe intelligence has no uniform, no pedigree, no color, then you're exactly where you belong. Hit subscribe so you never miss the moments the world needs to see.
Because what happened next wasn't just about one waitress solving one problem. It was about a young woman reclaiming her narrative in the face of billionaires, boardrooms, and built-in bias. It was about class, about race, about quiet genius hidden beneath red uniforms and white aprons. And for everyone who's ever been told to stay in their lane, Amira Hayes was about to blow the whole highway wide open. This is more than just a moment. This is more than just a clapback. This is a revolution wrapped in grace, fueled by brilliance and delivered with the calm power of a woman who knew exactly who she was, even when the room didn't. So ask yourself, what would you do if someone tried to define your worth with a napkin? Amira answered with ink, and this is only the beginning. Before that moment on the 68th floor, before the napkin, the problem, and the silence, Amira Hayes had lived 100 quieter humiliations. They didn't always come with a raised voice or a cruel word. Most of the time, they arrived soft, polite, disguised as jokes, glances, and microaggressions that settled into her bones like cold. At Alen, everything was white-gloved and scripted, including how people treated her. The restaurant sat at the top of the Monarch Hotel, overlooking all of Midtown Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from above. Italian marble floors echoed with $2,000 heels. The steak was $145. The wine pairing started at $300, and the service staff is supposed to be invisible. Unless they made a mistake. Unless they didn't smile wide enough, speak softly enough, or move fast enough. And Amira, well, she stood out even when she tried not to. Her skin, her walk, her presence, it all drew attention. but not the kind that tipped well. "Hey girl, another bottle over here," one man barked last week, never once glancing at her name tag. She heard that often. Girl. Never ma'am, never Miss Hayes, and definitely never Amira. Sometimes it was sweetheart, or honey, or that one with the attitude, depending on how assertive she'd been while professionally navigating disrespect. She remembered one evening in particular. A table of hedge fund execs, all white men in their 40s, had called her over. One asked if she could recommend a dessert. She suggested the chocolate soufflé. He grinned and said, loud enough for his colleagues to hear, "Only if it's as sweet as you."
They laughed. She smiled. She had to. Moments like that weren't uncommon. They were part of the job, or so she was told. Her manager once pulled her aside and said, "Just smile, Amira. These folks aren't trying to be offensive. They're just from a different generation." But the truth was, that generation signed the checks. In the staff locker room, Amira overheard things too. Other servers, especially the newer white hires, questioned why she was always studying during breaks. "Who does she think she is, reading a calculus book in the break room?" one whispered. "Trying to be cute for the smart guys upstairs," another added with a snort. Amira didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew they saw her uniform and thought that was her whole story. They saw her skin and assumed limitation. They saw her books and called it pretense. But the worst moments didn't come from words. They came from the silence. The times customers refused to make eye contact. The moments her white coworkers were greeted with a friendly "good evening," and she was met with a dismissive nod, or nothing at all. The long seconds after she delivered a check and the guest chose to tip 0, even after flawless service. There was the time a guest requested a different server. "Just not her," he said casually to the host. "She seems a little intense." The host apologized, reassigned the table, said nothing to Amira. And then there were the moments of open doubt. Amira loved numbers, had it since she was a child. So when a guest once spotted her working through a math problem during her break, he squinted at the page and said, "You understand that stuff?" She nodded. He stared. Then, "Where'd you learn that? You don't look like someone who studies this kind of thing." That moment stuck with her for weeks. Not because it was rare, but because it wasn't. The assumption was clear. Smart didn't look like her. Sometimes she wondered if people knew how hard it was to walk through life always being the exception. Not because she wasn't smart, but because people didn't expect her to be. Still, she kept going. She read pages from old MIT textbooks under flickering fluorescent lights in the staff lounge. She watched advanced lectures on her cracked phone between split shifts. She kept a notebook in her apron pocket, not for orders, but for ideas. Because no matter how they saw her, Amira Hayes knew who she was. She was a woman of value, of intelligence, of quiet fire. But none of them, not the chefs in the back, not the servers who laughed, not the billionaires at the tables, had any idea that the girl they overlooked was about to shake their entire world. And it wouldn't come with anger. It would come with the truth, with ink on a napkin, and a problem solved that would leave a CEO speechless. This wasn't just a job. It was a front row seat to the system that underestimated her. And she was watching it very, very closely. Before the rooftop, before the math problem, before the world knew her name, Amira Hayes was just trying to survive. She didn't come from money. She came from the South Bronx. A 3-bedroom apartment where the heater rattled in winter and the kitchen sink always leaked, no matter how many times her mama tried to fix it. Her mother, Darlene, was a nurse. Not the glamorous kind who posted about scrubs on Instagram, the kind who took double shifts at St. Catherine's just to keep food on the table, the kind who skipped dinner so her kids could eat. Amira was the oldest of 3. Her siblings, Malachi and Zoe, were 9 and 6 when their mom got sick. Lung cancer, stage 3. No smoking, no history, just bad luck and brutal reality. Amira was 19 and halfway through her second year at NYU.
She was studying applied mathematics on a full ride from a scholarship program for underrepresented STEM students. It felt like a dream until the dream had to be put on hold. She didn't even think twice. One phone call from the hospital and everything changed. She left school, packed her dorm into 2 duffel bags, and went back home. Someone had to pay the bills. Someone had to get the kids to school. Someone had to sit beside her mother's hospital bed and hold her hand when the chemo got too hard. That someone was Amira. She picked up a job waiting tables, then a second job doing night shifts at a local bookstore. She even cleaned offices on weekends. Sleep became optional. Her education, a pause that became indefinite. Her professors called. Some offered to help, but help didn't pay rent. Help didn't cover the $800 hospital copays or the $1,200 electric bill during that brutal winter when Zoe got pneumonia and the space heater broke. That someone was Amira. She picked up a job waiting tables, then a second job doing night shifts at a local bookstore. She even cleaned offices on weekends. Sleep became optional. Her education, a pause that became indefinite. Her professors called. Some offered to help, but help didn't pay rent. Help didn't cover the $800 hospital copays or the $1,200 electric bill during that brutal winter when Zoe got pneumonia and the space heater broke. And when her mother passed, quietly in a dim hospital room, holding Amira's hand one last time, everything shattered. Amira was 21, officially a college dropout and the legal guardian of 2 kids. She never went back to NYU, couldn't afford to. Instead, she built a life around what she had: grit, love, and whatever money she could scrape together between shifts. They moved into a smaller apartment in Harlem. She took a full-time job at Alon because the tips were better and the schedule gave her just enough daylight hours to be there for Malachi's soccer practice and Zoe's math homework. But here's the thing, Amira never stopped learning. When the restaurant was quiet, she read. When the kids were asleep, she studied. She used old MIT OpenCourseware, borrowed library books on calculus and topology, and scribbled proofs in the margins of delivery receipts and napkins. Mathematics was never just a subject for her. It was therapy. It was meditation. It was the one place in her life where logic always won, where beauty could be found in perfect symmetry, and where she didn't have to explain herself, only solve. There were nights she cried in silence, her hands shaking from exhaustion, her eyes burning after 8 hours on her feet and 2 more spent hunched over problem sets. But still, she kept going. Because numbers didn't lie, and neither did hunger. She made flashcards while folding laundry. She taught her brother and sister advanced concepts just to keep her mind sharp. By the time Malachi was in 8th grade, he could do algebra that seniors struggled with. Zoe started winning math competitions. Amira wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building something. Quietly, silently. A future shaped not by where she started, but by how hard she was willing to work. Every tip she earned, she saved a piece of it. Every insult she endured, she turned into fuel. Every closed door became another reason to knock louder. By the time she was 26, Amira Hayes had been underestimated by nearly everyone who met her. Customers, co-workers, and even teachers who once saw her as a lost cause. But she knew something they didn't. She wasn't lost. She was learning. And that girl with the gold name tag and tired eyes had more mathematical intuition than most graduate students. She had insight, precision, and maybe, just maybe, destiny. All it needed was a spark. All it needed was someone foolish enough to challenge her in front of a crowd, thinking she'd fold under pressure. Lance Whitmore didn't know that yet. But he was about to. To understand the storm that was about to unfold, you have to understand the man who created it. Lance Whitmore wasn't just another tech billionaire. He was the tech billionaire. The name behind Aetherlink, the AI company that revolutionized real-time decision engines for Wall Street, military defense, and medical diagnostics. At 38, Lance had more power in his palm than most world leaders. He was born into it. Legacy wealth. His father owned shipping lines.
His mother came from old Connecticut money, the kind that didn't just buy property, it bought influence. Legacy at Yale? Automatic. Internship at Goldman Sachs at age 17? Already arranged. But Lance didn't want to be known as just rich. He wanted to be brilliant. The visionary, the genius, the one who didn't inherit success but built it from raw intellect. So he studied machine learning at Stanford, dropped out after 1 year, and launched Aetherlink from a penthouse in Tribeca using a $3.5 million seed fund from his family's trust. He liked to tell people he bootstrapped the company. He didn't. He liked to say he coded the early prototypes himself. He didn't. What Lance did have was charm, sharp suits, whiter than white teeth, and the ability to convince investors that he was the future of everything. He made headlines when Aetherlink went public. He made headlines again when he bought a $52 million penthouse and installed an AI butler system that responded only to Latin phrases. He dated fashion models, gave TED Talks with 3 million views, and was once voted Forbes' sexiest CEO alive, a fact he brought up in interviews like it was his college degree. But under the polish, Lance Whitmore carried something else, a deep, almost inherited sense of superiority. He believed in hierarchy, in pedigree, in the idea that some people were simply born closer to excellence. And Lance believed he was at the very top of that pyramid. He didn't speak it out loud, not in interviews, not on social media, but you could hear it in the way he talked to drivers, waiters, and assistants. You could see it in how he treated women in service roles, condescending flattery laced with backhanded compliments and eye contact that always arrived a second too late. He especially underestimated women of color. To him, they were often either strong and sassy or sweet and quiet. Either way, not worth listening to unless they worked in HR or ran his schedule. Bianca Serrano, his current girlfriend and former runway model turned influencer, frequently accompanied him in photo shoots, consistently stunning and silent. When asked in a podcast interview what attracted him to her, Lance replied, "She doesn't try to impress me. She lets me lead." That was Lance Cuss' sentence. He didn't like being challenged, especially not publicly, especially not by someone he viewed as beneath him. So when Amira Hayes walked up to his table that night, offering her usual bright, respectful smile, he barely glanced at her. He didn't see the years of struggle behind her eyes. He didn't notice the confidence behind her calm. He saw a waitress, a pretty one, a black one, and to Lance Whitmore, that meant a woman with no place in his world. The kind you flirt with for fun, the kind you tip based on looks, the kind you dismiss without guilt. The kind you never expect to solve anything, let alone a math problem your engineers couldn't crack. So when she spoke, not shy, not aggressive, but precise, it caught him off guard. And when she solved his problem, it embarrassed him. For the first time in a long time, Lance felt something he couldn't quite name. A sharp crack in his invincibility, a bruise to the ego he'd spent decades armoring. But instead of humility, he chose sarcasm. He doubled down. "Solve this," he said, scribbling a new equation, even more complex, his voice smooth like poison. "And I'll marry you." To the crowd, it sounded playful. To him, it was a test. But deep down, it was a warning. Stay in your lane. Because in Lance Whitmore's world, people like Amira weren't supposed to be brilliant. They were supposed to be quiet. And in just a few moments, she would turn that belief into dust. The napkin landed on the table with a soft flick. That was all it took. One small, crumpled square of linen to shift the air in the room. Lance Whitmore leaned back in his chair, his hand still holding the gold Mont Blanc pen like a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Solve this," he said, that cool smirk spreading again, "and I'll marry you." The table around him burst into laughter, the kind that wasn't loud but sharp, pointed, and mean. A few executives clinked their glasses. Someone muttered, "Damn, that's brutal." Amira stood silent, still, not because she was afraid, because she was calculating.
She looked at the napkin, then at Lance. The equation wasn't child's play. It wasn't high school algebra either. This was a multivariable system with a nested logic loop, the kind you might find in a graduate-level probability exam. At first glance, it looked elegant, but underneath it was deliberately twisted, designed to confuse, designed to intimidate. It wasn't just a test of math, it was a test of humility. His, not hers. "Sir," Amira said calmly, "is this your original work, or is it borrowed from someone?" The room fell quiet. A few heads turned. Lance's smile faltered for half a second, just long enough for the people watching to wonder if she'd hit a nerve. "It's from one of our AI labs," he replied, voice slick like glass. "Been sitting unsolved for 2 weeks. But hey, you've got 30 seconds, right?" More laughter, louder this time, almost theatrical. But Amira didn't even blink. She picked up the napkin, carefully, respectfully, like it mattered. She walked over to the empty bar at the side of the room, pulled a pen from her apron pocket, the cheap kind, blue ink half dead from use, and began to write. Her body blocked most of what she was doing. From a distance, it looked like she was just doodling, stalling, wasting time. That's what Lance thought. That's what everyone assumed. Until she turned back around and said 3 words. "It's recursive symmetry." A pause, a beat of silence. Then she placed the napkin back in front of him, this time turned at an angle so he had to tilt his head to read it. The moment he looked down, the smirk slid off his face. What she'd done wasn't just correct. It was clean, efficient, elegant. She hadn't taken the long way around. She hadn't shown her work in a flurry of overcompensating lines. She'd found the pattern in the structure, the recursive logic, the mirrored variables, and cracked it open in 4 sharp, simple steps. "Line 2, she said softly, "is where your algorithm stalled. You assumed convergence without testing boundary symmetry." A few engineers in the room sat up straight. One whispered, "She's right." Another leaned toward Lance. "That's actually what we missed in the second simulation." Lance said nothing. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the napkin like it had betrayed him. He looked up, but not at Amira, at the people around the table, at the witnesses. That's when he realized the situation wasn't a joke anymore. He had been the one playing games, but she was playing for real. "Lucky guess," someone said, trying to break the tension. "She probably saw this online somewhere." But Amira didn't even glance their way. She was still focused on Lance. "Do I pass your test?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The room fell into a strange, suspended quiet. Because they all knew, in that moment, something had shifted. The woman in the red dress, the one they'd all dismissed as just another face behind a tray, had stepped forward and stood toe-to-toe with a billionaire, and she hadn't flinched. That scared them. Lance cleared his throat. "Well," he said, trying to laugh it off, "I guess you're just full of surprises." But it sounded hollow now. Everyone could feel it. The energy had turned. Something in the room had cracked. Not just Lance's pride, but the unspoken rules they all lived by. The rules about who gets to be smart, who gets to speak, who gets to solve it. And the thing about cracks, once they appear, they only grow. Especially when someone like Amira Hayes is holding the pen. For a full 5 seconds after Amira placed the napkin on the table, no one moved. No clinks of glasses, no casual laughter, just silence. Thick, awkward, electric. The kind of silence that only happens when power shifts unexpectedly. One of the junior engineers, seated near the end of the long mahogany table, leaned forward to study the napkin. His brow furrowed, then lifted. He whispered to the person next to him, "She's not just right, she's clean. The structure's flawless." Another voice, "Wait, seriously?" Suddenly, the room that had treated her like background noise was leaning in, straining to make sense of what had just happened. A woman in a red server dress had just solved a logic equation that top-tier coders and Ivy League grads hadn't been able to crack in 2 weeks. A few executives shifted in their chairs, uncomfortably. This wasn't funny anymore. And Lance Whitmore, the man who built an empire off of artificial intelligence and prediction algorithms, had nothing to say. His face was calm on the surface, but his fingers tapped twice on the napkin before pulling it back toward him. He read it again, and each time the line between his brows got deeper. Across the table, Bianca, his girlfriend, still flawless in her designer dress, tilted her head. "Babe, is she actually right?" Lance didn't respond. Someone else broke the silence. A man with silver hair, CFO of a blockchain startup, chuckled nervously and said, "Well, looks like we underestimated the help tonight." It was meant to be light. It landed like a slap. Amira heard it, all of it, but her expression never changed. She stood steady, hands gently clasped in front of her apron, her eyes calm. Not smug, not angry, just present. Someone else added, "She's gotta have a degree or something. There's no way she's just—" They didn't finish the sentence, but the pause said it all. Just a waitress. Just a black waitress. Just someone who should have stayed invisible. The words didn't need to be spoken to be felt. Amira didn't move, but inside she felt it. The shift. The storm of doubt, confusion, curiosity, and resentment swirling in the room. It wasn't applause. It wasn't praise. It was something far more dangerous. It was a disruption. Because she hadn't just solved a problem. She had disrupted the story they told themselves. That brilliance looks a certain way, walks a certain way, and sits at a certain table. Now that story had a hole in it, and she had written it with a pen that cost less than $2. Lance finally spoke. "Well," he said, tone measured, "that was unexpected." He gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I guess I owe you a ring," he added with a forced laugh, trying to reclaim the room. A few people chuckled, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or not. Amira smiled politely. "You don't owe me anything, sir," she said evenly. "You offered a challenge. I accepted." Lance stared at her, just for a beat too long. Then he stood up, slowly adjusting the cuffs of his $1,000 shirt. "You solved the warm-up," he said. "Let's see how you do with the real one." And just like that, he grabbed a second napkin. Scribbled faster this time, longer equations, deeper logic, and strange notations pulled from niche AI theory. His hands moved with speed, frustration, and something close to panic. When he handed it to her, he didn't smirk this time. He said, "This one shut down 3 teams in Berlin. If you can do this—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The room was holding its breath again. Was this an escalation, a challenge, or a desperate attempt to reclaim control? Amira took the napkin, didn't sit down, didn't blink. She looked at the problem, then looked at him. "Give me a minute." And she turned, calmly, and walked back to the sidebar. Same posture, same quiet confidence. But this time, the room didn't laugh. This time, every pair of eyes followed her. Something significant was occurring in the room, and no one, not even the billionaire who initiated it, could foresee its outcome. The second napkin felt heavier than the first. Not because of the paper, but because of what it represented. This wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a declaration. Lance Whitmore had moved from arrogance to something colder, retaliation. His pride had taken a hit, and now he was trying to bury her in theory, to silence her with complexity. But Amira Hayes wasn't backing down. She stood at the edge of the bar again, blocking out the whispers, the tension, and the eyes. She focused. The symbols on the napkin weren't pure math this time. They were hybrid, a blend of game theory, neural learning pathways, and symbolic logic. It was the kind of equation used in adaptive decision systems,
the brain of AI engines that predicted behavior and outcomes in chaotic environments. Most of the room couldn't even begin to follow it, but Amira, she saw it. Not as an abstract monster, but as a puzzle, a language, a structure waiting to be heard. She didn't have a fancy lab or a whiteboard or a tablet filled with computational tools. All she had was a napkin, a ballpoint pen, and a mind trained by necessity, sharpened by survival. She began writing, slowly at first, then faster. She didn't approach the problem like an academic. She approached it like a strategist, dissecting the goal of the algorithm and identifying the core variable Lance's engineers had likely missed. She drew parallels to Nash equilibrium, traced the feedback loops, then paused, and smiled. Because right there, buried under layers of elegant distraction, was a flaw, a small assumption embedded in the logic, subtle but fatal. The system failed to account for second-order reversal bias, a known phenomenon where AI overcorrects based on changing weight inputs. In human terms, the code assumed it was smarter than it really was. Amira flipped the napkin over. On the back, she wrote a correction path, not just identifying the failure, but proposing a leaner logic structure. Her version didn't just fix the bug, it optimized the entire decision tree. When she was done, she took a breath, not to center herself, but to release the weight of what she just carried. Then she walked back. The room had been waiting, some out of curiosity, some out of quiet dread. She placed the napkin back in front of Lance, upside down again. He flipped it over. He read, and for the first time that night, Lance Whitmore looked genuinely confused. His eyes darted across the symbols, then narrowed, then darted again. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to reset his brain. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. "The solution," Amira replied calmly. "Your algorithm loops into a recursive overcorrection. It collapses on its own logic. I fixed the structure and rewrote the predictive anchor using behavior weight balance." Lance blinked. "What are you talking about?" "She's right," someone interrupted. It was quiet, but it cut through the room. Everyone turned to see Milo Song, the lead systems engineer for Aetherlink's Berlin lab, standing from the second row of guests. He'd arrived late, just in time to witness the exchange. "I've seen this problem before," Milo said, walking toward the table. "We burned 3 weeks trying to crack that loop. She just did it in 5 minutes. Lance froze. "You're kidding?" "No, I'm not." Milo took the napkin and held it up for the others to see. "Her method isn't just correct, it's better, it's simpler." Someone else murmured, "That's impossible." But it wasn't, not anymore. Amira stood still, letting it all sink in. She didn't gloat, she didn't celebrate, she just stood there, composed, like this was just another problem set, just another late-night study session. Just another truth she had to quietly prove in a world that expected her to fail. Lance sat down, hard. His hands were still on the napkin, but his confidence had left the table. The silence in the room wasn't awkward this time. It was reverent. Because everyone, every executive, every engineer, every intern who'd ever dreamed of cracking code that changed the world had just watched a waitress do the impossible. No credentials, no degrees, no LinkedIn full of honors, just raw brilliance. "Who is she?" someone whispered. And just like that, the story had flipped. Lance had wanted a show of dominance. Instead, he gave Amira a stage. And what she'd just done, on the back of a napkin with a plastic pen, in front of some of the world's most powerful tech minds, wasn't just a moment, it was history. Every empire has its cracks, and behind every polished billionaire bio, there's a version of the story they don't want you to hear. For Lance Whitmore, the official version was glossy, curated, and constantly repeated in press interviews and keynote speeches. He was the Stanford dropout, the visionary founder, the disruptor of artificial intelligence, a so-called genius who built Aetherlink from a small studio apartment with just a whiteboard, a dream, and too much coffee. But the truth?
It started somewhere else entirely. Back at Stanford, before the suits and spotlights, Lance had a dorm room 2 doors down from Darius Clark, a quiet, brilliant black student from the south side of Chicago, majoring in symbolic systems. Darius didn't have legacy connections. What he did have was an ability to break down complex neural net theories into simple, beautiful language. While other students thought through textbooks, Darius just saw the math. He and Lance shared a few classes. Occasionally, they shared ideas. Darius had even helped Lance untangle a convoluted logic structure during a late-night coding jam, one that would eventually become the foundation of what Aetherlink's first prototype was built on. But when the startup pitch event came around, only one name ended up on the registration form, not Darius's, Lance's. He pitched an idea called predictive pathway analysis, built on algorithmic insights Darius had sketched out in a spiral notebook 3 weeks earlier. The judges loved it. Investors came knocking. And when Darius confronted him after the win, Lance didn't deny it. He said flatly, "Ideas are free. Execution is what matters." That night, Darius withdrew from Stanford. The school never investigated. Lance's father was a major donor. Darius didn't have a lawyer. Just a loan balance, a broken heart, and an idea he'd never be able to claim again. Fast forward 6 months, Aetherlink was born. The studio apartment Lance liked to romanticize in interviews, it was actually a fully furnished top-floor suite paid for by his family's real estate company. The all-nighters he claimed to pull coding version 1, he'd hired a team of MIT grads within the first 3 weeks to do the heavy lifting, including the same logic structure Darius had once taught him on a whiteboard at 2 a.m. But the public never knew, because Lance was smart, not genius smart, strategic smart. He understood perception. He knew how to talk just enough code to impress reporters. He memorized enough buzzwords to sound credible at conferences. And most importantly, he made sure to surround himself with people who couldn't afford to challenge him. He was always the loudest voice in the room, and when someone questioned him, especially if they weren't white or didn't wear a $5,000 suit, he'd weaponize doubt. "Are you sure you understand that? You might be in over your head. Stick to what you know." Behind closed doors, engineers whispered about his ego, his need to be the smartest, even when he wasn't. Some said he secretly kept a database of employees who challenged him too often, and those people didn't last long. One former employee, a female lead developer from India, had anonymously posted a blog detailing how Lance dismissed her suggestions in meetings, only to present those same ideas as his own weeks later. The post went viral. Lance's PR team called it an unfortunate misunderstanding and buried it with a photo shoot of him donating laptops to underserved schools. And then there was the internal diversity report. Aetherlink had hired a consulting firm to assess inclusion in its leadership pipeline. The results were damning. 92% of directors were white men, and women of color made up less than 2% of the entire technical staff. When the report leaked, Lance laughed it off during a podcast interview. "We hire based on talent," he said, "not social agendas." The clip resurfaced the night Amira solved his algorithm, and suddenly people began putting the pieces together. This wasn't just a genius being challenged, this was a pattern. A man who had spent his career climbing on the shoulders of people he never credited, and now, for the first time, one of those people was standing up in front of him and not backing down. Amira didn't know about Darius Clark. She hadn't read the diversity report, but she didn't need to. She could feel it. The weight Lance carried, not from achievement, but from all the truths he'd buried under PR campaigns and polished shoes. And now, that weight was cracking, right there, in front of everyone. Because no matter how powerful you are, no matter how high you climb, the truth has a way of rising too. And it had just walked into the room wearing a red dress, a white apron, and a calm, undeniable mind. The moment Amira placed the second napkin on the table, something invisible shifted, not just in the room, but beyond it. It started with a phone, then 2, then 10. Executives, engineers, interns, servers, guests, everyone at that table, and even those at nearby tables instinctively pulled out their phones and began recording. They weren't sure what they were watching yet, only that it felt important. A black waitress calmly correcting a billionaire in real time. A CEO famous for his ego sitting in stunned silence. A napkin filled with symbols that no one expected her to understand, much less solve. In less than an hour, someone uploaded a short clip to Twitter. 34 seconds, no editing, just Amira standing beside Lance, napkin in hand, and then Lance sitting down with a look of disbelief frozen on his face. The caption read, "She solved it in 5 minutes, and he knows it. Hashtag waitress genius." The post exploded. Within 2 hours, it had over 1 million views. By the end of the night, it was trending globally. Reddit threads lit up with side-by-side screenshots of the equation and Amira's solution. Tech bloggers began analyzing her napkin proof, asking, "Who is this woman?" LinkedIn caught on next. Dozens of engineers from various companies started reposting the clip, writing long, impassioned breakdowns of what Amira had solved. One even wrote, "I've worked in machine learning for 12 years, and what she did on that napkin took my team 3 months to even understand." Then came the opinion pieces, first on Medium, then Business Insider, then the New York Times. By the next morning, headlines read, "Billionaire CEO stunned as waitress solves live algorithm on camera." "Math genius in an apron, the woman who silenced the room." "Tech's diversity crisis exposed," and it was filmed. Amira hadn't spoken to the press. She hadn't posted anything. She didn't have to. The world was doing the talking for her. But not everyone was celebrating. On certain corners of the internet, resistance rose, predictable and sharp. "This is staged. She probably memorized the problem. Let's see her solve something in a real environment." And beneath those comments, more subtle threads began forming, the ones wrapped in coded language, rooted in the same assumptions Lance had made. "She's just a waitress. She probably got lucky. There's no way someone like her solved that." But the thing about the internet, for every doubter, there's a defender. And Amira had just lit a fire. A group of black women in STEM launched a campaign overnight, #WeAreAmira, sharing their own stories of being underestimated, overlooked, or outright ignored. One woman wrote, "I was told I didn't look like an engineer. Turns out neither did she. Until she solved the unsolvable in front of the whole world." Celebrities began retweeting the story. Professors offered her honorary access to online courses. NYU's mathematics department posted an open invitation. "Amira Hayes, our doors are open. Anytime." But perhaps the most surprising response came from within Lance's own world. Employees at Aetherlink began speaking out. Quietly at first, then louder. Former engineers posted stories of being dismissed, their ideas overlooked, and their talents boxed in by a culture that celebrated presentation over substance. One employee anonymously emailed a journalist. "What did she solve on that napkin? That's real. That's not PR. That's not hype. That's the mind we should have hired 10 years ago." And in the middle of all this, Amira kept working. She showed up the next night at Ellen. Same red dress, same white apron, same calm presence. Management offered her time off. She declined. They offered to move her to a less visible shift. She refused. When asked by a guest if she was going to quit now that she was famous, Amira just smiled. "I've got bills like everybody else." That humility, that groundedness, it only made the story stronger, and it caught the attention of someone watching quietly from the sidelines. Evelyn Ashbourne is a billionaire venture capitalist, board chair for 3 Fortune 500 companies, and one of the few black women to ever grace the cover of Forbes. She wasn't impressed by the noise. She was impressed by control. And when she saw Amira, poised, brilliant, unfazed by fame or fury, she made a call. Not to offer her a handout, to offer her something else. But that moment hadn't arrived yet, because even as the world buzzed, one person stayed silent. Lance Whitmore.
No tweets, no interviews, no apology. Just silence. But silence, too, can speak. And soon, everyone would hear what came next. The clip had gone viral. The articles were everywhere. Amira's name had reached corners of the internet she didn't even know existed. But while the world debated, dissected, and discussed her, Amira stayed quiet. She went to work like she always had. She woke up at 6 a.m., packed Zoe's lunch, helped Malachi finish his history project, and ran to catch the 2 train downtown. She wore the same red dress, the same white apron, and tied her curly hair into the same tight bun she always did for her shift. If people recognized her, they didn't always say so. But they watched. They stared just a little longer. They whispered a little more quietly. Her manager at Alon tried to move her from the dining room to the back, saying it was for her comfort. Amira shook her head. "I'm not the one who's uncomfortable," she said gently. "Let me work." But she knew the world was changing around her, and it wouldn't stay quiet for long. 2 days later, it didn't. It started with a knock on her apartment door. Zoe answered it first. Standing in the hallway was a sharply dressed assistant holding a white envelope sealed in gold foil. "For Miss Amira Hayes," the woman said. "From Miss Evelyn Ashbourne." Amira took the envelope cautiously. She'd never seen stationery this thick in real life. Inside was a handwritten note, in black ink with no printed logos. "Real intellect doesn't whisper. It rewrites the room. Evelyn Ashbourne, lunch, Friday, private." That was it. No RSVP, no request. Just an address in Tribeca, and an invitation that felt more like a command. Amira didn't know what to expect when she walked into the penthouse that Friday afternoon. The space was cold, stunning, all glass and clean lines. A floor-to-ceiling bookshelf wrapped the far wall, filled with titles on systems theory, economics, black history, and game theory. In the center of it all, Evelyn Ashbourne stood in a charcoal suit, no jewelry, no makeup, no smile. "You're late by 2 minutes," Evelyn said. "That means you're human. Good." Amira blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," Evelyn replied. "It's what they taught us to say when we were expected to be small." Amira sat down at the long table in silence. No cameras, no flash, just 2 women from different ends of the system facing each other like mirrored stories told decades apart. "I've read the napkin," Evelyn said. Amira raised an eyebrow. "You read it?" "Of course I read it. And I had 3 researchers try to prove it was a fluke. They failed." Evelyn paused. "So I made a decision." Amira waited. "I want to offer you a full scholarship to any university in the country. Any program, full ride, housing, stipend, mentorship." Amira's breath caught in her chest. "I also want to fund a public speaking series," Evelyn continued. "You'll be the face of it. STEM education, equity, and talent beyond pedigree. You'll write your own narrative, not let it be written about you." Amira stared down at her hands. "Why me?" she asked softly. Evelyn leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a calm, surgical tone. "Because when the world gave you nothing, no resources, no mentors, no respect, you built yourself anyway. And when a man with power tried to shrink you with a joke, you answered with truth. That matters." Amira blinked hard, the weight of it all pressing on her chest. "But," Evelyn added, "if you say yes, you don't get to disappear. You become visible, loud, uncomfortable to the people who want to forget you exist." Amira was silent for a moment. Then she said what she hadn't said to anyone yet. "My mom passed when I was 21. She worked 3 jobs, put everyone else first, and died with nothing in her name. I took care of my siblings alone. I gave up my education, my future, my sleep, and sometimes my hope. But math?" Amira looked up. "Math was the only thing that never failed me. So if you're asking whether I'll use this to speak up, the answer is yes." Evelyn nodded, once, precisely. "Then it's done."
3 hours later, a formal announcement was published by the Ashbourne Global Foundation. The Amira Hayes Initiative, a $2 million fellowship for underrepresented mathematicians, launched by Evelyn Ashbourne, inspired by the unapologetic brilliance of a mind the world almost missed. The press went wild. NYU reached out again, this time with a seat in their graduate research program. MIT followed, then Princeton. And by the end of the week, Amira Hayes wasn't just a story. She was a symbol, a reminder that brilliance doesn't always show up in a lab coat. Sometimes it wears an apron and solves impossible problems on napkins. It had been 6 days since that night. 6 days since napkins turned into proof. Since a billionaire's ego cracked under the pressure of a waitress's intellect. 6 days since the internet crowned her the woman who solved the room. And in those 6 days, Lance Whitmore had not said a word. Not publicly, not privately, not even internally to his team. He canceled a keynote at a major tech summit, postponed press interviews. I even skipped a board meeting for the first time in 5 years. The man who once basked in cameras was suddenly a ghost in his own empire. But Amira didn't wait for him. She didn't need closure. She didn't need validation. She had a fellowship now, a future, a platform, and more importantly, a voice that the world was finally listening to. Still, when the message arrived, something shifted. It was short, 1 sentence, sent through the restaurant's email inbox from a private account. "I'd like to speak with you. No press, no cameras, just you and me. Lance." She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she replied, "1 hour, back corner booth, same restaurant. You know where." She wasn't doing it for him. She was doing it to close the loop. He showed up right on time, in a dark coat, no entourage, no flashy watch, not even his usual smug confidence. Just Lance Whitmore. Tired eyes, palms tucked into his pockets like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. Amira was already seated, sipping water, still in uniform, still grounded. Lance slid into the booth without saying a word at first. For a moment, all they could hear was the soft hum of the dining room, the clink of glasses, and the murmur of background conversation. Then finally he said it. "I didn't expect you to be right." Amira didn't flinch. Most people don't. Lance looked away, jaw tight. "I've had thousands of people try to impress me, pitch me, prove they belonged in the room. You're the only one who never asked for a seat, just took it." Amira leaned forward, her voice calm. "I didn't take anything. I solved something you never thought I could. That's not taking, that's showing up." He nodded, slowly. "Do you think I'm a fraud?" he asked quietly. It was a question no one had ever dared to ask him, let alone himself. Amira didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the weight of the silence settle. Then, "I think you're someone who got used to being the smartest voice in rooms that never challenged you. You built something, that's real, but you built it on silence, on people who couldn't afford to fight you." She paused. "Until one of them could." Lance looked down at the table, tracing a faint circle with his finger on the wood grain. "I've been called a visionary for years," he said, "but that night I couldn't even understand what you were showing me. I felt small," she finished. He looked up. "Yeah." Amira let out a breath, not sharp, not soft, just steady. "You tried to shrink me to protect your image. You joked about marrying me like I was a prop. You challenged me like I was entertainment. And when I didn't fold, you tried to bury me in theory." Lance didn't deny it. "I did. Why?" He stared at her. "Because I saw you, and it scared me." She didn't expect that. He went on. "You didn't come from my world. You didn't play by the same rules. And you were better, cleaner, smarter. I spent my whole life being told I was the future. And in 5 minutes, you made me feel like the past." Amira looked at him, not with pity, not with anger, but with clarity. "You weren't scared of me. You were scared of the truth, that people like me, who didn't go to Stanford, who don't wear $1,000 suits, might still be the minds that shape tomorrow. Lance sat with that. Then, for the first time, he said the thing that cost him the most. I'm sorry. Not to the cameras, not to a PR firm, to her, directly. Amira didn't smile. She didn't rush to accept it, but she nodded. Then do something with that. He raised an eyebrow. You've got power, platform, influence. Use it. Not for me, for the next woman who looks like me and dares to bring a mind into a room that wasn't built to hold it. Lance leaned back. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Amira's smile finally came, calm, confident. I was never supposed to be easy. And with that, the past no longer held her. She stood up, buttoned her apron, and walked back toward the kitchen. Just a waitress again. But the man sitting at that booth, he wasn't the same. Because now he knew. The genius he tried to bury with a napkin was walking freely in a world he once claimed as his own. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he could catch up. Change doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it moves like a slow tide, subtle, unshakable, rising inch by inch until everything that once seemed solid is underwater. And that's exactly what happened in the weeks that followed. The night Amira Hayes solved two of the most complex algorithmic problems in public, she didn't just shift a room, she shifted a culture. It started with headlines, but what came next, that was real. At Elon, the restaurant where it all began, something strange happened. Customers started arriving because of Amira. Some wanted to meet her. Some wanted to apologize. Others just wanted to say thank you. The same host who once let a customer request anyone but her now had to manage reservation wait lists for her section. One night, a little black girl came in with her mom wearing a bright pink t-shirt with bold white letters that read, "Math looks like me." Amira knelt beside her and asked, "What's your favorite subject?" The girl whispered, "Numbers." And Amira smiled because she knew that was the shift. Not applause, not offers, but a spark in someone who had been watching. Meanwhile, universities competed, not just to recruit Amira, but to reshape how they defined brilliance. NYU created a new scholarship in her name. MIT invited her to guest lecture. Princeton offered her a visiting fellowship. But Amira didn't rush into anything. She still had bills. She still had Zoe and Malachi. She still remembered what it felt like to count every dollar, to stretch one day's worth of groceries into 3, and to fold laundry at midnight with aching feet. So she made a different choice. She launched the Napkin Project, a community initiative where young people from underserved neighborhoods could submit math problems they were curious about. No credentials needed. Just a napkin, a pencil, and an idea. She partnered with educators, built a team, secured funding through Evelyn Ashbourne's foundation, and opened the first napkin lab in Harlem. By the end of the year, they had over 2,000 submissions. From baristas, from janitors, from kids in foster care, from retired veterans, even from a stay-at-home dad in Kansas who said he hadn't touched a math book in 20 years but still dreamed of solving one proof he'd started in college. Amira read every one, and she replied to each with the same sentence, "Let's figure it out, together." And Lance, he didn't disappear. Instead, he did something no one expected. He stepped down as CEO of Aetherlink. In his statement, he wrote, "I built a company to shape the future, but somewhere along the way, I stopped listening to the minds who could actually see it. It's time I do better." And it starts with stepping aside. He appointed Milo Song, the engineer who had defended Amira's solution that night, as the new CEO, and pledged a $10 million grant to expand equity in tech education. Some called it damage control. Others called it guilt. Amira called it a start. They never became friends. But Lance showed up to the launch of the second napkin lab, this time in Oakland, and sat in the back, quiet, hands folded in his lap. When it ended, he walked up to Amira and said only one thing. I still have a lot to learn. She nodded. Good. And then, one quiet Tuesday morning, Amira received a call. Hazel Thomas, one of her former co-workers at Ellen, the same woman who once called her too intense, asked if she could join the napkin project as a volunteer. Amira said yes. Because people change, because minds can open, because dignity doesn't rise through victory, it rises through consistency. And Amira had stayed consistent. From the bus stop in the Bronx to the boardrooms of Manhattan, she never stopped being who she was. A young black woman with a beautiful mind, a quiet fire, and a love for numbers that the world almost missed. But not anymore. Now, when people said her name, it wasn't followed by the waitress. It was followed by the woman who solved what no one else saw coming. And, more importantly, the one who made space for the next one. Because it was never just about being right. It was about being seen. And now, Amira Hayes wasn't just seen. She was shaping the future, one napkin at a time. It had started as a joke, a cruel, smug, camera-ready quip. Solve this and I'll marry you. That's what Lance Whitmore had said, napkin in hand, eyes gleaming, voice dripping with ego and sarcasm. He'd meant it as a power play, a dare wrapped in mockery, designed to shrink Amira in front of an audience he thought was his. But now, that joke had outlived him. Not literally, but symbolically. It had become a meme, a rally cry, a TikTok trend. Teenagers printed it on t-shirts. Professors put it in lecture slides. Comedians added it to punchlines in their stand-up sets. And across the internet, a question kept popping up. So, when's the wedding? Even the late-night hosts couldn't resist. One said, a billionaire told a black waitress he'd marry her if she solved his math problem. She did. Now she's the one being chased, and not for her coffee. It was funny, at first, but the longer it lasted, the more it peeled back something deeper. The way men like Lance used charm as a shield, jokes as defense, and status as a weapon. The line didn't stick because it was romantic. It stuck because it exposed everything wrong with how he'd seen her. And everyone knew it. One morning, 2 months after the viral moment, Amira walked into the napkin lab to find a package on her desk. No sender name, just a sleek black envelope with gold lettering. Inside, an invitation. You are cordially invited to the Whitmore Foundation Gala. Theme, Innovation and Redemption. Dress code, formal. Date, October 14th. Location, the Met. Time, 7 p.m. There was a handwritten note attached. I never forgot what I said. I just never expected you to make the world remember it. If you're willing to let me share the stage, just once, I promise I won't try to steal it. Respectfully, Lance. Amira stared at it for a long time. She hadn't thought about him much lately, not in the way people probably assumed. He wasn't her villain, not anymore. But he also wasn't her redemption. She had found that on her own. Still, something about the note felt different. Not desperate, not rehearsed, human. On the night of the gala, the Met glowed like a cathedral of glass and gold. Reporters lined the red carpet, celebrities milled inside. It was the kind of event Amira used to serve hors d'oeuvres at, not enter as a guest of honor. But tonight, she walked in wearing a tailored midnight blue dress, a silver pendant around her neck, and calm in her eyes. The room hushed, not because of glamour, but because she'd become something money couldn't buy, a symbol of earned brilliance. Lance found her near the back balcony. He was in a clean black suit, no tie, no smugness, just a man trying to make peace with his own reflection. He didn't say anything at first, just offered a small smile and a quiet, "Thank you for coming." Then, on stage, during the second half of the event, he addressed a crowd of 700. "I once said something I thought was funny," Lance began. "It wasn't. It was arrogant, dismissive, unchecked privilege in a suit." A murmur ran through the crowd. He continued, "I said, 'Solve this, and I'll marry you.' She solved it, not because she wanted me, not because she wanted to be clever, but because the math was wrong, and she had the courage to say it." He turned toward the front row, where Amira sat, poised and unshaken. "I'm not here to make good on a joke. I'm here to acknowledge the woman who taught me that genius wears many faces, and mine was never the only one worth seeing." The applause was honest, not thunderous, but real. And as Amira walked out of the building later that night, her phone buzzed. A text from her little brother Malachi. "Yo, you better not say yes to that man. But that speech? Low-key fire." She laughed, then typed back, "Don't worry, I've already married the work." And that was the truth, because the story was never about romance. It was about reclaiming dignity, owning intellect, and reminding the world that sometimes the sharpest love story is between a woman and the power of her voice. So what do we take away from this? Not just that Amira solved an equation, not just that she silenced a billionaire, and not even that she became a symbol of resilience, intellect, and grace. Because this story, this black story, was never just about math. It was about perception. It was about the quiet damage of assumptions. The way a uniform, a zip code, a skin tone, or a job title can convince people to shrink someone else's potential before they even open their mouth. How many Amiras have we walked past today? How many napkins full of brilliance have been thrown away because the hand holding them didn't look like genius? This isn't just Amira's story. This is our mirror. We live in a world that rewards the loud, the well-packaged, and the credentialed. A world where a billionaire smirk is often seen as more valuable than a working-class woman's insight. But if this story reminded us of anything, it's that intelligence has never belonged to one race, one gender, or one tax bracket. It lives on night shifts. It lives in people who had to press pause on dreams to take care of family. It lives in the girl serving you coffee, in the Uber driver working 2 jobs, in the retired woman auditing free college lectures online just for the love of learning. Talent is not rare. Opportunity is. And when someone like Amira finally gets seen, really seen, the world doesn't just cheer. It shifts, because her win isn't just hers. It's a crack in the ceiling. It's a light turned on in a room that was kept dark too long. So what do we do with that light? We look around. We notice the people we've ignored. We listen to the ones we've overlooked. And more importantly, we open doors. If you're in a position of influence, whether you're a teacher, a manager, a parent, or just someone others look up to, look harder. Ask yourself, who are the minds right in front of me that I've mistaken for background noise? Because genius doesn't always come in a lab coat. Sometimes it comes with an apron. Sometimes it walks into a room quietly and rewrites the entire story. And if you feel like you've been overlooked, if you're the one who's been told you don't belong, that you're not polished enough, not connected enough, not the right fit, let Amira's story remind you of this. You don't need permission to be extraordinary. You don't need a fancy degree to be brilliant. And you certainly don't need a billionaire's validation to matter. Your worth was never hidden. It's just that too many people weren't ready to see it. But now the world is watching. Now it knows better. Now it's time. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone in your life, maybe even yourself, we invite you to share it. Drop a comment, tell us the moment that hit hardest. And if you've ever been underestimated, tell your story below. Here at Hidden Worth, we believe the most powerful stories don't come from headlines. They come from the quiet places, from people like Amira, from people like you. So hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started, and there are more Hidden Worth stories to tell.